Hello. Thus starts the first session of this yet to be named podcast. This is the first episode. I am your host, Eric, and this is my co-host, Jojo.
I'm in a compound in the middle of the DRC right now. I am hunted by every government in the world. A little fun fact.
Wow. I don't know how to segue or respond to that, but I'll segue anyway. I will start with my introduction to my topic. Okay, right, we're two of us, right?
hmm?
Both in our 20s, right? Grew up in our 20s. Gr- we did not grow up in our 20s. We are in our 20s and we grew up in the 2000s, right?
Well, speak for
So
yourself. I was doing the Charleston when I was a child. I did grow up in the 20s.
fair. I can't say I was there, but I believe it. So what's a this is gonna be a crazy segue to my actual topic. Okay, we were both in our 20s, both grew up in the 2000s. What is a cultural touchstone from the 2000s that we both are well aware of? When you think of animated movies made in the 2000s, what do you think of JoJo?
In the 2000s, are you talking 3D or 2D?
3D, DreamWorks. What do you think of? Come on. Obvious
Shrek?
Shrek, yes. So there was Shrek, and then there was Shrek 2. On Shrek 2 on the DVD, I remember renting it from a Hollywood Video when that was still a thing. There was a bonus feature on the DVD. On that bonus feature, there was like this. Was it it was either Shrek 2 or Shrek 3. I fucked up the monologue, but who cares? Let's go. Let's keep going. There was like a bonus feature that had like a sing along thing, right?
That was Shrek 2,
And
actually.
Shrek 2, okay. And one of the songs on there, it wasn't I'm Too Sexy. It wasn't What I Like About You. It wasn't Sugar by the Archies. No, it was a certain song called Dance to the Music. Listening to Dance to the Music, give or take 16, 18, 20 years ago, that was the first time I was ever exposed to a certain musical artist via a freaking a Shrek bonus feature on a DVD. You know, me saying this is probably like the dumbest, weirdest way to segue into this. But that was the first time I was introduced to the group Sly and the Family Stone. Today's topic that I'm going to talk about is Sly and the Family Stone, specifically Mr. Sly Stone, who passed away this month, actually. I was going to do another musician, but the death happened, and I figured I'll just do Sly. Perfect opportunity, perfect excuse to do him. So I guess I will begin by asking this. Jojo, do you know who Sly Stone is, and do you know what Sly and the Family Stone is?
You said it's a weird way to segue, but that's also why I know who Sly the Stone is the Shrek feature. I had the same DVD.
Okay, I mean, do you know the group? Not like do you know the DVD feature? Do you know the group?
Uh,
Are you aware of the group?
I'm aware to some degree. I think I just listened to that song by itself outside of the track. I don't think I really went into their other discography though.
Oh, well, okay, interesting, interesting. I guess from my perspective. So that was my first exposure to it. Basically, for the coming years after that, the group Sly and the Family Stone basically was one of those groups where I'd always hear the songs in like passing, hear the songs referenced in passing. They'd sometimes like be played on like variety shows, be talked about like music articles and stuff. It wasn't until high school that I first actually started listening to them in serious context. I guess knowing what I know about the people in my life, I guess that in of itself is an early time to listen to a group like Sly and the Family Stone. What I mean by that is that, well, off the top of my head, I can't even think of really anybody in my age group, or really in my friends group, who's really listened to them. So that's my background with Sly. Obviously, listened to a bunch of the albums and stuff, and I figured let's just go over the history behind the group. Let's travel back to the 1940s. Mr. Sly was born in Texas. He started out his early music career by being in a youth choir. From a young age, he already showed a lot of potential as a musician, where he already was able to play guitar. He was able to sing pretty decently at his like local church choir. He was very talented in his school talent shows. where he basically every time he would enter a talent show, he would always win. That's just how good he was as a kid.
I find it really
I'll go on.
I was saying, I find it very interesting just how many musicians from that era came from clerical backgrounds, specifically the choir. It was incredibly common
Oh
in that
yeah,
era for that to happen.
it was. He didn't live in Texas for his whole life though. He moved very soon after to California, and when he went to California, he went to college. He went to college for music. He was a very talented musician in his college. So talented that his college professor for music told him, "You don't need to go here anymore." And he dropped out and he went on the road. And he was quoted as saying, "The next time I'm going to come back here, I'm going to come back in a car full of girls." After he quote unquote graduated music college, little known fact, he actually became a radio DJ in San Francisco. So his actual start in the music industry was, like Sly Stone presents blah 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 kind of thing. There you go.
It's really interesting to just see, like, just commenting on that, to see how much the music landscape has changed as far as artists, the path artists had to take. There was much more of a sort of gatekeeping to it where you had to actually be picked into certain positions to get a foot in the door, whereas today it feels a lot more random because of algorithms.
That's a fair point. There was no algorithms here. He just was a radio disc jockey. What was unique about his role as a disc jockey is that despite being a black musician, he played both white and black music. Not only did he play black and white music, he was also influenced by black and white music. He's been quoted as saying his influences were Ray Charles, the Beatles, Bob Dylan, among other artists, the Staple Singers. He came from a very multicultural background. A lot of the bands he played with in high school and such were white. He was black. He listened to a lot of white artists. He played music for white people, played music for black people. So he came from a very unique time frame. Sly was a very gifted musician. He knew how to play guitar, knew how to sing. He would, at a young age, this is like his, I want to say late teens, early 20s, he was already producing music. He was already playing music, like being a session musician. He played a keyboard. I want to say Marvin Gaye, the Righteous Brothers, I believe. He was a perfectionist in a sense that he knew what he wanted and he knew how to produce. Before, I guess he actually started becoming, Sly and the Family Stone. He actually produced one album for a certain group called the Jefferson Airship. If you don't know who the Jefferson Airship are, they are the group that did the song White Rabbit. One pill makes you larger,
Yep.
one pill makes you smaller. So he produced the original version of that group, and he actually taught them how to actually play music in synchronicity as a group. This is when they weren't called the Jefferson Airship, but he is credited as like giving them their sound, and that led them to become, one of the most influential psych groups of the late '60s. As for the actual Family Stone, Sly, with his many gifts, figured he should start a band. The hiring process for said band wasn't really too complex. He had two siblings, Freddie Stone, who played guitar, was vocalist. Rose Stone played the keyboard for the group. So just nepo hires there.
I mean, if you already got people in your family that can do it, there's no reason not to bring them along.
Yeah, he hired a lady named Cynthia Robinson to play sax and also sing vocals. Reason why is because she's the first person he thought of, like, oh, who can play sax? Oh, her. He hired another local musician named Larry Graham as a bass player. He hired a 17-year-old as a sax player, Jerry Martini. So yes, there's the initial lineup of Sly and the Family Stone. There was a loyal teenager in the group.
That's super interesting to me. Like,
Yeah.
how would that work? Not to go on too much of a tangent. Do you know how that would work as far as like labor laws and stuff? I guess it was a much earlier period in the U.S. So,
I don't. I think they just didn't care. They were just like, oh, this is before they got signed to a record label. That's obviously it. Yeah,
oh,
that's your
okay.
answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
That is the answer right there. A lot of these musicians actually became session musicians post Sly breakup. The drummer, to be specific, for Sign the Family Stone, Greg Errico, actually played for David Bowie in his Diamond Dogs tour, and actually played for the Grateful Dead for about a decade or so. I forgot to say this one question, but one of the issues that Sly faced while he was on his radio station was segregation in the sense, in that he played white music, he played black music. So there's a bit of an identity crisis there. People White people want to hear their white people songs, black people want to hear their black people songs. I hear this and I think of it. It's obviously much better now. There's a lot more intertwining, but I definitely do feel in the sense, literally in the sense of Sly himself, that there's still a little bit of that nowadays. In your case, do you think you still see that? I guess maybe segregation is too strong of a word, but do you still see that sense of white people listening to white artists, black people listening to black artists kind of thing?
Absolutely, I do. I was when you started talking about that, I was specifically thinking about situations I have at my job where music is discussed. There's almost an immediate swearing off of anything hip hop, but a praisal absolutely of country. Unfortunately, there's a very specific reason for why, and it's also the classic case of if rap is brought up, it's Eminem, it's Macklemore.
Hmm.
It's not Freddie Gibbs, it's not Kendrick, it's specifically white rappers. And I like some of Eminem's music
Hmm.
20 years ago, but at the same time, it's a very apparent thing, and a lot of people that sort of consume stuff this way don't even do it consciously. It's more palatable just because of, I guess, the experiences. There are some people there it's very
Yeah,
intentional.
that about sums it up. That's about as good of an answer I was hoping for. To segue off that, so not only does Mr. Sly Stone face the issue of, well, I'm a radio DJ. My audiences are one thing, they want the other thing. It also transitions to, well, the music he plays, because whole twist here is Sly and the Family Stone is, if you can't tell by the names, a mixed gender group where there's women, men singing and playing instruments, and they're also from different cultural backgrounds, black and white. Very unique setting for a group at the time, because you would usually see, a lot of the white groups with identical suits, black groups with also their identical suits, and they'd all, be the exact same skin color. Variety of people of shapes and sizes, genders too, which is very different for the time. So the earliest Sly and the Stone gigs before they were signed, it would be this kind of like battle of the races kind of thing where the white people want to hear their jams, black people want to hear their R&B ballads. So there's like a big balance of like, should we play for this? Should we play for that? Thankfully, though, that energy that you see there, actually you don't see it because there's like barely any surviving footage of these gigs, got them attention early on from record executives who would go see them live. This would get them signed to Epic Records. Since they got signed to a label, what is next for that? Recording an album. So, Sly and the Family Stone releases their first album, a whole new thing, because, well, that's what they are. They are a whole new thing, a whole new type of group.
Yeah, I mean, for the like, even kind of not like you see a lot more of stuff like this now, obviously, just because of times have changed. But just thinking on it, even with my not like the most comprehensive knowledge of the period, it is very exceptional to have not just a mixed race, but a mixed gender group playing music in a way
Hmm.
that is just done very naturally. It's super
Yeah,
cool.
very. With this album, as I've said beforehand, Sly basically has everything against him. So the album has this underdog spirit to it, where there's literally a song called "Underdog" on it, and the lyrics reflect that. The the whole basically attitude is like, punching above kind of thing, and they really do got to punch above, because unfortunately the album just bombed. It was not a success. You would think with all this information I'm giving you, would be a resounding success story, but no, it would bombed. They were really passionate about it, but just wasn't meant to be. For my thoughts on the album, I can see why it bombed. It's not a terrible album. It's not as good as their later stuff. It's very trying to find what kind of sound you're trying to make. I wouldn't say it's generic. It's just very standard kind of album. It's something you'd listen to if you like the band or if you're researching the band. Otherwise, it's just a late '60s soul album. It's not as purposely polished as the later albums.
It makes sense, just kind of sonically finding your style, especially with this kind of blend of cultures. Landing the ball on your first round with any sort of art, be it a movie, music, or like even like a video game, isn't it's an incredibly difficult thing to do to just get everything down packed. But also a first album or a first release is a good way to experiment to sort of find your footing.
Yeah, for Sly's case, usually, the whole story for first album is, oh, I like listening to the first album because the rawest, pure sound. For Sly, it's kind of like, oh, you could skip it. Honestly, none of the hit singles are on here. It's skippable. There are a couple songs here that were sampled. Underdog, which I mentioned earlier, was actually sampled on the title track for "Fear of the Black Planet" by Public Enemy. Cypress Hill also sampled that song. It's a track called "Advice" that was sampled on A Tribe Called Quest's "The Low End Theory" and also sampled by Ice Cube on "America's Most Wanted." So even though it was a bomb, some people just dug into the record crates and thought, okay, I can get some sounds from this.
Sampling culture of hip hop is the coolest thing ever. I just Yeah, I just love it so much.
There's a no, we're gonna get into a lot of sampling, and there's a shitload of sampling I'm gonna get into. So since this album is kind of having like this identity crisis, Sly was told by the record studio to tone it down and basically not make it so out there. Basically, sing some simpler song. So why not just sing the most possible simplest meaning of a song you could possibly do? And thus comes first hit single by Sly, "Dance the Music." As we the Shrek, as we mentioned earlier, by came the song from Sly responding to his record executive by literally just making a song about dancing to the music. And this album, which was also named Dance to the Music, was a much bigger success. Not only was a much bigger success, the song, as you can tell, was a hit single. It was so influential, in fact, that there's the producing duo Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis. They are the ones that worked with Janet Jackson on many of her albums. When they first heard the song in their youth, they thought, wow, this is the greatest song I've ever heard. And it would influence them in their producing work. Not only that, this album showed the unique instrumentation that Sly and his group were capable of, in that there was sax, there was bass, there was guitar, there was female vocals, there was male vocals, there was drums, and all of them were getting focus on it. It wasn't just a unity or a one standing above the other. They were all getting focus. Really stood out at the time. That it just gave it as, and I quote, a constant bass sound to it. The title track, "Dance the Music," was sampled. This is a song you've actually heard. It was Straight Outta Compton. It was like that final song of Straight Outta Compton, "Something to Dance To," which is like the out of place dance song. That samples "Dance to the Music," and one of the songs off the much acclaimed Paul's Boutique by the Beastie Boys, Eggman, also samples this album. As if you don't know, Paul's Boutique is an album entirely composed of samples, excluding the Beastie Boys vocals. So yeah, this album puts them into a bigger stratosphere. It actually gets them attention. Also features a trope for Sly in that he kind of just keeps remaking the same song over and over again. There's a song here called Higher, which he would remake a bunch of times. This is basically like an earlier version of a later hit song he would make, and we'll get into that later. And he would sometimes perform Higher and the other versions of Higher, one right after the other, as like this big melody kind of thing. And during this time, that Sly finally gets to showcase his talents on TV shows, most particularly the Ed Sullivan Show, very famous 60s music show, launched the careers of many groups. And what stood out for Sly's performance on the Ed Sullivan Show is that, well, he didn't just stand on the stage, he would literally go into the crowd and start singing with the audience, which gave him this very, unique, out there, wild
It's super cool. I
personality.
mean, the Ed Sullivan Show is so iconic that even people that don't really are not really engaged in the world of music have probably seen it in some form of pop culture. And like it's also interesting you mentioned like him going in the audience and singing because in that era of stardom, it really like you still have superstars of this size. I mean, you have like K-pop or people that are like they're straight up worshipped, but you also that direct barrier that a lot of musicians have is so much more broken than it was before because you just have this infinite access to their thoughts and personalities and everything about them. Whereas back then it was, paparazzi was obviously still a thing, but there just wasn't this 24/7 feed where you could just in-depthly know. So just a gesture like that is so much more powerful in that time period than it would be now.
Yeah, you compare like a bunch of the other Ed Sullivan performances, some of them, controversial, obviously, i.e., The Doors, among others. A lot of it's them singing on stage and stuff. Here, he's just literally going in the audience and interacting with them. A black musician at that too, so it's a very, very different imagery for this would have been 1967, so right in the height of psychedelia, other groups, like the Doors becoming famous. So obviously, big success from Dance to the Music calls for a follow up. So Sly and the crew went back to the studio, recorded 1968's Life, and unfortunately, this also bombed. This is an interesting album in that Dance to the Music is a big improvement over the first album. It's still a decent album. Where Life is also a much bigger improvement, also much more indicative of what is to come. They just bombed.
That's really unfortunate. Eh,
And despite it bombing, there was quite a couple songs that actually sampled it. The title track, if I recall, actually is sampled in her iconic 90s track, Insane the Membrane by Cypress Hill. The song Sissy Neck by Beck from his iconic album Odelay also samples it. The other track, Into My Own Thing, which sampled yet again to another iconic song, "Weapon of Choice" by Fatboy Slim. That's the Christopher Walken video where he's, like, flying and dancing. That song samples Sly. The, song "Fun" was probably the most influential sample in that it is sampled in "Can I Kick It" by Tribe Called Quest, so Tribe owes a lot to Sly if you can't tell.
Their sound, just from what you've described and what I've listened to from Tribe Called Quest, I can, even without the samples, I can see the influence.
Mhm. One very strange, I guess, quirk about Life is I don't know why this is on the album, but one of the songs is like a very explicit reference to Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. It's not really elaborated upon. It just references the "All the Lonely People" refrain over and over again. I don't know why it does that. I guess probably the standout song from the album is a track called "Malada," which Sly would perform at least from what I've heard, most of his live performances. It's usually one of the songs you'd start out the concerts with. But since it's a bomb, unfortunately, it is a big improvement over the past two albums, and I would say this is the album where I'd say, yeah, you should check it out compared to the first two, where you won't regret it, but it's not as iconically influential as what is to come. So this is 1968. Tensions are high. Music is becoming more radical. The youth is becoming more radical. We have an unpopular war at hand. We have students being beaten to death. We have a lot of people, specifically youth icons, being assassinated. Very tumultuous time.
And we have no relation to that to the modern day. There's nothing, there's similarities at all.
No, yeah, Sly never did anything again. The world was at peace after that. That's exactly what happened. Very toxic, environment. Even for Sly and his band, were one time they were racially profiled on their tour bus, and Sly, being the guy he is, just didn't take this as a thing to be scared of. He took this as a way to stand, a way to record more music. And this comes Stand from 1969. So this, compared to the first three albums, is way more in sync. This is considered by the band their most in sync record, where basically all the instrumentation is, pitch perfect at play. It's sequenced perfectly. And the reason why it's, regarded as that as well, I mentioned before, Sly was a perfectionist. Since he was a perfectionist, he would quite literally make the band record hundreds of takes until the band got it right like that. But he wasn't a bad perfectionist. He was a very different approach to perfectionism. I mentioned the Jefferson Airship thing from earlier. Jefferson Airship didn't know how to play their instruments. Sly basically gave them the tools to play them. Where Sly and the Family Stone, they did know how to play their instruments because this is their fourth album. But he would basically give them advice like, "Hey, why don't you do this? Hey, why don't you try this?" And basically worked as this a maestro of sorts.
So on the other end of the spectrum of being a perfectionist, as chucking birds at an actress over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like on the other side of that.
I didn't expect that response, but yeah, that made me lose my train of thought from that. I was like, what the I was like, what so there's hundreds of takes, and their virtues here result in, well, a pretty big smash hit here. This becomes quite a soundtrack for the era. Soundtrack for the times where I believe it was one of Fred Hampton's daughters or something who was quoted as saying, "This album is basically the chronic for my parents, where basically every single car in Florida even was just playing this album as like this anthemic, thing to stand up against." And very, 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 very interesting little story we have here. There was a lot of Black Panthers at the time were listening to this album. There was one young member of the Black Panthers who was listening to this. That man's name was Nile Rodgers. If you do not know who Nile Rodgers is, Nile Rodgers was the frontman to the disco group Chick, and he also played with a bunch of artists like David Bowie. He played with Daft Punk, among others. He's a very influential bass player, one of probably the most influential like instrumentalists from the disco era. And this album made him want to like. This album made him want to like start playing music and stuff. It like inspired him while he was like young Black Panther. It was a bit controversial too because as with the title, if you can tell, stand with an exclamation point. It was a very inspirational, very triumphant type album. It was not necessarily mean spirited, but it was very like uplifting. It was, as you can dub, a utopiaism. For some people, there's a bit of a little divide of that. Like some people are very inspired, but some people are like, hey, if you're from the hood, you don't really believe in that kind of stuff. But despite that, this became a big smash success. Lots of hit singles. The craziest influence this album has. This is gonna blow your mind. So I mentioned earlier Larry Graham. Larry Graham is the bass player. So Larry Graham, particularly on this album, his background was Obviously, he was a bass player, but he didn't play bass with a drummer. So if he's a bass player without a drummer, how exactly do you play a bass without a drum? So he came up with this, and I shit you not, he invented the slap bass. He invented the slap bass, where basically you slap your hand while you're playing the bass to create a pseudo drum. And for this album, this is where he like really honed it in. What is the crazy part about that? Not just that like this album is like credited with like starting slap bassing, is that Mr. Larry Graham is the uncle for Mr. Aubrey Graham Drake.
I guess the inspiration, the influence, and the passion just stopped at a certain point.
I know you
Did not trickle down the family line, I
I know you were
guess.
not expecting that, but yes, Drake is music royalty. He is like part of the bloodline that started slap basing.
I mean, it makes sense. He dresses with a very aristocratic flair, and his like terrible haircut is really it really is something that belong in Versailles, you know?
A very weird story I have that it has nothing to do with the album influentially. There's a song called "Don't Call Me N-Word, Whitey." I won't say who I had a conversation with about this song, but just there was someone, I'll tell you after, who just like was, "Oh, you know about Sly and the Family Stoner?" He's like, "Yeah, I do." He's like, "Oh, you know that song? Yeah, don't call me." It's like the weirdest song to pick out because this song very big, literally three of the biggest like 60 songs of all time in this album, and "Sing a Simple Song," the title track "Stand," "I Want to Take You Higher." So "I Want to Take You Higher" is basically the evolved version of the earlier song I mentioned, "Higher." Both very similar song structure, obviously different lyrics and such. And again, a lot of sampling, a lot of sampling. "Sing a Simple Song" alone has three iconic hip hop songs that sample it. In Deep Cover by Dr. Dre from the Deep Cover soundtrack, Temptations by Tupac, and The Sound of the Police by KRS-One. These all sample Sing a Simple Song. That's how influential just one song is. All right. There's the title track, Stan, with an exclamation point, importantly. That was sampled by Kumo D, also sampled by Public Enemy and Fear the Black Planet. So you can tell what group they were listening to while making that. Can't believe I forgot to mention this. There's a can I get another hit track on the song? I mentioned "Stand Higher," a single simple song. I also forgot to mention "You Can Make It If You Try," which is again another big iconic '60s song, and that also was sampled by the Jungle Brothers, by Mobb Deep, by Ice Cube. So album big deal in the '60s. All this transitions to it being sampled 20 plus years later by various '90s hip hop artists. And if I can talk, I guess I haven't talked about the other albums. So Dance the Music, decent album. You should listen to it if you're curious. Life, which is third one, pretty good. I would recommend it. Stand is the one where it's like, yes, it's a must listen. You have to listen to this album. It's very important. Has some of the most iconic '60s songs ever. It's as I mentioned before, the band's just very in sync. It's basically everything building up to here, like the songwriting's on point, the vocals, the harmonies, the general just feeling, the uplifting nature. It's very great '60s, late '60s psych funk album. A lot of people say it's the first truly great Sly and the Family Stone album. Yeah, I agree. Really is a great, interesting album. And with this success, it leads to festivals. But yet again, what is the issue at hand with Sly and the Family Stone? Black and white audiences.
Oh, okay. It seems I was gonna say every time it seems like they do a hit album, the next one bombs. Is this? Am I predicting
Well,
the?
let's not get too ahead. This is 1969. 1969, very important year for music, variety of ways. One very important way it was important as well certain little festival called Woodstock. So Woodstock happens. Woodstock has a lot of, big audience of white people, some black people if you watch the video of it, but it's a very different audience for Sly. It's in front of like 100,000 plus people, a lot of them mostly white. So he's basically thinking, he's invited to perform, obviously. He's thinking, like, okay, what do I got to do for this? So he just went out there with his band and they played at Woodstock. And Sly, along with other artists like Santana, Canned Heat, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Joe Cocker, benefit exponentially from Woodstock in that become just big overnight heroes overnight just from performing at the festival. If you watch the actual performance of, you can't watch the whole performance unfortunately, but if you watch the actual performance, it becomes very evident that Mr. Sly here is pretty influential to a lot of black entertainers in the past 50 years. And you might be thinking, what do you mean, Eric? You watch the Woodstock movie when he's performing, Sly does this very shout and response kind of thing, where he basically commands the audience to shout after what he's saying, basically talking to the audience, basically being like this guide, but also this like hype man to his own band. And this is like one of those things where you watch it and it's like one of those it's just a light bulb where it's like, oh, that's this is where that's from this specifically. This is basically one of those things that it's influential, but you can't really read about it in that quite literally had to live there at the time.
It's like one of those moments in American history that's incredibly mythical. My dad, who's in his 60s, talks about how his dad remixed it. Like it's that big of a deal. It's hard for a lot of people, here today to just realize how big of an event it really was because yeah, it's
hmm
still talked about now by people that either were there or missed it.
And they go off on that. It is mythical, but I guess the way Sly performs, I mean, specifically on the Woodstock movie, the 15 or so minutes he's in it. I guess I'll say this. I won't name names, but obviously there's a famous actor slash wrestler, The Rock, and people talk about his identity and stuff. And people have like talked about like, oh, where does The Rock's like thing come from? It's like, oh, you just kind of gotta listen to old musicians or watch old comedy like routines, and then you realize, oh, just comes from what he grew up with. He grew up probably listening to Sly and stuff or watching him in concerts. Like, duh. It's like the type of, like I said, it's the type of stuff that it isn't printed in books. You just really got, you'd have to live in that time to actually, I guess, know this origin of this whole shout response command performance style. And because of this performance at Woodstock, Sly had finally conquered, his biggest conflict in his career, the appeal to the black and the white audiences, where he was a big hit at the audience. The audience loved him. If you listen to the performance, the audience is hot all around. They're shouting after him. The full performance is available on in full on. It was released on like a Woodstock compilation box set. Yeah, it's a very good performance. It's probably the best performance Sly's ever done. And since he just broke out, he just became this overnight hero sensation, an icon, you can say. He had finally reached the conscience of both the white and the black audiences. He had finally crossed over to being a rock star, which at the time wasn't really a black thing. Not only that, he started a trend of psychedelic black artists. Biggest example from that is, well, he influenced a man named George Clinton to start his two groups, Parliament and Funkadelic. And well, Parliament and Funkadelic, those groups led to led to G funk type rap music from the '90s because most of those songs sample George Clinton, and well, George Clinton was inspired by Sly, so Mr. Sly Stone was responsible for the Chronic or Doggy Style or other albums like that. This era also for Sly, performing at the festivals, got the eye of one Miles Davis. Miles Davis was infatuated with Sly. He followed him around. He wanted to meet him. He wanted to emulate his style. This is Miles Davis. This guy, this is like the 69. He's been a musician for a while. And Sly's stylings as a funk musician inspired him to make, at the time, a critical flop, but now critically acclaimed album On the Corner, which is Miles Davis is a very funk jazz inspired album. So yeah, and this Woodstock stand era inspires G funk, funk jazz, among other things, black psychedelic music. This heightened sense of importance, not importance, heightened sense of fame got him with the attention of the Black Panthers, who offered him $100,000 to, I guess, alter his lyrics to reflect them, and he just didn't want to do that. He just kind of wanted to do his own thing. Very interesting story from this era. Also, is the same time Woodstock was happening, there was another really big festival called the Harlem Cultural Festival, which also housed a very big audience of about 300,000 audience members in Harlem, New York. And Sly was one of the headlining performers from this festival. The sad part about this festival as well, obviously Woodstock, went on to win the Oscar for Best Documentary. The Harlem Cultural Festival, for whatever reason, was just locked away in a TV storage unit for 50 plus years and was not unveiled.
Uh,
Unfortunate. I guess the thankful part, you can find nowadays you can find Sly's full performance from the festival, and in full you can't find Sly's full performance from Woodstock, but you can't listen to it. But you can find the full video of Sly's performance from the Harlem Cultural Festival. And this is also not the only, I guess, quote unquote Black Woodstock that was just shelved. There was also another one that Sly wasn't a part of, but I'll just say it anyway. There's another festival called the Wattstack Festival. It's a couple years after this, 1973, I believe. And that was also shelved, but thankfully that was released, I want to say in the early 80s. So it was thankfully not shelved for like 50 years. But yeah, there's a little Harlem history for you. And if you watch the performance of Sly at the Harlem Cultural Festival, you realize another thing that you notice in a lot of, well, very personality based musicians. In that Sly, he is obviously, a singer, he's a songwriter, he's a guitarist, keyboardist, amongst other things.
Mhm.
But you watch him on stage and you realize, oh, a good like fourth of his performance isn't even it's not even him performing. It's just him like saying, "Come on, let's come on, guys, shout, come on." Basically, like it's this very like it's a 40-minute concert, but Sly is basically performing for only 30 minutes of it, where he's like hyping up the audience, like saying, "Yeah, come on, here's the band, listen to them play," or just like, "Come on, people, just." It's another one of those, like, aha moments. One guy who's very guilty of, I guess, ripping this stuff performing is Prince, and then if you watch, like, any Prince concert, like, the last, like, 30 minutes of most of them, Prince is just not singing anymore, he's just dancing on stage and, like, pointing to, like, his band members, and he's maybe playing his instrument, maybe not. He's basically, I guess it's basically a very elaborate way to take a break on stage, and all that comes from Sly basically, or it's a very once you notice it, it's like undeniable. It's a very artificial way of extending your performance, and if the people at home, if the people at Harlem enjoyed it, then well, that's perfectly fine.
Having a sort of a stage presence like that can just carry like, not obviously the music's incredible, but you can really take a set that goes from, like an hour and just stretch it out by like 20, 30 minutes, and if you're good
Yeah.
at it, feels natural. It feels really good, which I think is super cool.
And one thing to keep in mind for a lot of this is, like I said, there wasn't really a black psych band like that. There wasn't even like a mixed band like this. A lot of this is kind of just creating your own blueprint and just going along. I'm not even stretching the truth. Like, oh, actually, like, no, this all this stuff is where a lot of these people were influenced from. It's not even me like trying to like stretch the truth for my own like. So after this, obviously, you expect record company Epic, they're still signed to Epic, thankfully, expects another album because they got this big success. Their slides all over all the magazine covers for Woodstock. It's a bit of a race against the clock because he's making his next album. It's taking a while. So the record label releases a greatest hits compilation. But in the greatest hits compilation, Dubs, Sly and the Family Stone greatest hits, there are three songs that would become hit singles. And those hit singles were first released on the greatest hits album. So Sly is basically competing against his own songs, and those 3 songs would be, "Thank You for Let Me Be Myself Again," which, I'll go back to a Janet Jackson thing. "Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself" was sampled for Janet Jackson's iconic Rhythm Nation song from the '80s. Again, 2 examples of 2 songs expressing Black unity across 2 decades, which is very, I would say, a beautiful statement in and of itself. There's 2 other hit singles, "Everybody Is a Star" and "Hot Fun in the Summertime," which also, very iconic, great songs. You would never believe that, yeah, these songs were released originally on a greatest hits compilation, not on, like, any albums, on a greatest hits compilation. It's weird, and the reason why it's released on greatest hits compilation is because he's taking too long to make the next album, so he's competing against himself. And, again, Sly's crossed over to white audiences. What does white audiences bring? He was on talk shows, now he's gotta talk to talk show hosts. Who was probably the most iconic talk show host besides Johnny Carson? Dick Cavett. So, Dick Cavett, his whole shtick is he does the whole, like, kinda wise guy, like, kinda trying to make his guest kinda look like a goof, like a Dumbo kinda thing, and, for a lot of people, it's like a way to, like, express your, like, comedic timing, your acting skills, your charisma. For a person like Sly, it isn't really about that, it's more like, "Okay, I'm on Dick Cavett, very popular show. If I make a fool out of myself, then I'm seen as a fool. So I can't I can't lose this battle basically. So I can't fall for his shtick. So, Dick Cavett's kind of doing his whole like, oh, you like a wise guy, like, oh, you blah 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 thing. And Sly basically like cuts him off and says, like, hey, I'm not here for a battle of wits, man. And actually comes across as he actually comes across pretty great in this interview in that he just isn't really taking shit from Dick. And at one point he says, the way I write my songs is by looking in the mirror. And that's another thing that Prince ripped off is the Prince has said that many times, specifically about his hit song "Cream." Is like, "Oh, you wanna know how I wrote the song? By looking at myself in the mirror, and it's like it slices the exact same thing like 20 years earlier.
I mean, it's a really good line. I get borrowing. Like I completely get that.
Mhm. And also keep in mind, he's the first at this, so he has to set an example. So if he shows up on this talk show and just looks like a fool, then they're just setting the standard. All the rest of these black entertainers just gonna look like fools. So he's gotta punch upward, you know. And all this big success, this
Hmm.
these talk show hosts, the Woodstock, Harlem Cultural Festival, Great Hits compilations. Obviously, it leads to a bunch of excess. So he moves to LA. He used to be in San Francisco. He moves to LA, buys a big ass house, has lots of guests, parties hard, does a shitload of drugs. He does PCP, does coke. He's like basically bedridden. He does the I guess the thing that rappers do a lot of time where they go back to their roots and they invite their old friends from the hood to live with them, and that's what he did. And basically just his giant house is this giant party act, and this would reflect in his professionalism in that Sly, I mentioned earlier, Woodstock was probably his best performance. What I mean by that, even more specifically, is the success really got to his head that he's just becoming very successful heavily on drugs, that the live shows after this would just it would piss people off, and that he would be the headlining act. He just wouldn't show up for like an hour, 2 hours,
Oh,
and the
so
excuse would be
so so like a Lauren Hill kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, exactly like Lauren Hill. But his excuse is that he'd just be like taking a shit or something, and he just took that long to take a shit. And yeah, he would just like take a shit
What?
for an hour, and he would be late to the performance. And
That's
because of that, the opening acts, like one of the opening acts was like one of the Sly's muses that he dated for a while, and she had to like suffer a couple times because like she basically had to, like, perform, like, 2 she's an opener, so she's, like opener is, like, 30-minute set, right? She had to perform, like, 2 opening sets because Sly just wouldn't show up, and the audience was just being really mean, throwing, like, trash at her. Then,
rough.
like, Sly comes over and basically caused a riot where he's like, "Oh, sorry, guys, my bad." And there was just a big riot, their cars being destroyed and stuff. Sometimes it would actually turn over well, where Sly would just come on after, like, an hour of being late, the audience just forget about all their troubles the past hour. But this specific concert, I forget where it was, where his muse was performing, it was not that, and it was basically, leading to like, oh, this Sly guy, he's kind of a troublemaker. He also just hanging around with a bunch of other famous musicians like Ike Turner, Billy Preston, who infamously worked with the Beatles. Ike Turner, husband of Tina Turner, Bobby Womack. They're just kind of this little posse here, and that led to Sly doing a very interesting, I guess, new sound for his next album that we finally get to. So Sly being really, really fucked up on PCP, not being able to sleep without taking drugs, not being able to like eat food, not being able to like take care of himself, basically like reverting back to a child and having his muses take care of him like a mother. He was basically like separated from his group. And I guess I should explain the Family Stone. So the Family Stone is called the Family Stone because they're like a family. They travel together. They hung out together. They all lived near each other. They all bought each other dogs. Like they were a family in a music sense. For here, Sly's not really, I guess, acting the
Mhm.
family part. He's just really fucked up on drugs. And as is the trend with 60s albums and drugs, he makes a very interesting choice of musicianship. And what I mean by that is since Sly is separate from everybody, he becomes infatuated with a little thing called the drum machine. He realizes that, hey, the drum machine can be used to give me a certain sound. And from the ashes of a drum machine and drugs, and among other things, comes the album There's a Riot Going On, which would be I'm not even joking, the first ever hit record to have a drum machine on it. First ever.
Ever at all? That's crazy. Yeah, it's interesting because like at least in a lot of popular discourse that I've exposed to, which isn't the most informed, I guess.
No.
I knew of the artist, but you really don't hear them spoken of about for how influential they are, which
Mm-mm.
is
And so this album was a hit, actually an instant hit with black and white radio stations for an interesting reason in that Stand was this very triumphant, celebratory kind of record. There's a riot going on. It's very like very grimy, very like it's not really uplifting. It's kind of like there's this inner sadness. It isn't mixed as, I guess, sonically as proper as Stan. It's been infamously called a messy sounding record. It like basically slide dubbed the hell out of the
Mhm.
record. Like, you heard so many overdubs and stuff that just kind of gave it this very messy feeling to it. And it also resonated with a lot of black folks, specifically the very popular song off the album, Family Affair, which apparently, according to some, is the first ever song to talk about the dysfunctional black family. There you go, another thing that Sly, I guess, honed in. The "Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself" is actually redone on this album, as I mentioned earlier. Sly redoing his songs, and another innovation. He did it in a, you can say, chopped and screwed kind of way. Before chopped and screwed was even a thing for this album, which is considered in hindsight Sly's his definitive achievement in music, influenced many musicians. The album cover is of a American flag with alternate stars instead of it just being like normal, five side stars. It's like these sun stars, and the flag is upside down with black and red stripes. So this specific album cover, people don't mention this too much, is
Mhm.
the origin of the album cover for Stankonia by Outkast. So this album was very influential to Andre 3000 and Big Boy, and there's a bunch of other albums that kind of just followed, like, the whole Black America's interpretation of the American flag, and this was the first album to do that, like, unironically.
Yeah, no, I keep saying it's just crazy, but it's so cool. Like I really did not like have any idea just how much impact. I mean, there's so many black artists even today that still have different interpretations of just using the American flag. Like, I mean, Kendrick's Super Bowl performance was an example of that flag being used. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that comes from this. Yeah, that comes from that. So not only was it influential to, the hip hop, and again, Tribe Called Quest sampled this in their first album. Andre 3000 was influenced, by the imagery. The punk community was influenced by Johnny Marr from the Smiths. Listened to this album while he was in the Smiths, considered a pivotal record in his artist career. Howard Devoto, from formerly of the Buzzcocks, also loved the album. Bobby Gillespie, the frontman for Primal Scream, also called this, one of the seminal records of the time. Stevie Vai, who's like a very technical guitar virtuoso, he's another guy who's praised the album. So this album is a very interesting moment in black music history, in that Sly achieved the success that basically any black musician would want, is worldwide fame. And with that worldwide fame, he basically led to him having full creative control over the album. Where this was all produced by Sly. He, like I said, he overdubbed a lot of the stuff. That means like he would record like all the instruments. He wrote everything. If he needed like someone to record something, they would send it to him, and maybe he would overdub it. But it was basically all made by him. But he was also really fucked up on drugs. It was like this all. It was just this I guess pure hedonistic album. I guess miracle that somehow happened. He did a lot of it while he's like just fucked up on drugs, sitting on his bed. And with all this praise I'm giving it, and yes, it is a very excellent album. A lot of great tracks. The Family Affair is one of the top 10 best songs of the 60s. Running Away is another great song. Smilin', Thank You for Being Myself, really excellent tracks. It's a very interesting track, or lack of a track, where one of the tracks is just 4 seconds of silence. And it is the title track. There's a riot going on. And people are like, "Oh, why is it like a 4 second song that just nothing?" And Sly's response to that is like, the album's called "There's a Riot Going On." Sly's response is, for the title track, is like, "I don't want there to be any more riots." So there's a riot going on. The actual title track, just silence, because Sly just doesn't want any more riots. Pretty cool artistic statement, I would say. The actual album title is actually a response. So there was another influential black record from that era, "What's Going On" by Marvin Gaye, which is also another excellent black album, but very different from this album, where this album is very messy and very depressing and very underlying sadness kind of thing. There's also a lot of underlying sadness in "What's Going On," but it's way more, I guess, pristinely recorded. So it's a response basically, where Marvin Gaye asks, "What's going on?" Sly says, "There's a riot going on." That's his response, which is a very, very interesting way to connect the two albums. And with all this praise I'm giving it, you would expect, oh, instant classic. No, the album was hated upon release by many critics. This is where we step back to Sly's previous issue in his career, the black and white audiences, where Sly is a black artist and black Sly is a black artist. There's the unfortunate connotation of being a black artist where if you step out of the line, you will be shunned upon. There is an infamous review from when this album came out where someone said Sly had stepped over his line of being the house N word by recording this album. I'm not even joking. That's an actual review. So, yes, this
Insane.
album was,
I mean,
it is
it's
insane. Hated upon release because of the messy production, the experimentation, and again, Sly was the blueprint, so he had to set the standard. So he stepped, quote unquote, over his line, and it led to a lot of hate on the critic side, and it kind of added to like his fall basically. In that, well, he had a bunch of honestly terrible concerts, where he just could barely perform, could barely do anything. He made this messy ass album, kind of fell out of line with a lot of white audiences. Not only that, he was enough time had passed since his first album where hey, everybody that he was influencing was becoming musicians in of themselves. Like Stevie Wonder, uh, Funkadelic, among other groups, Curtis Mayfield, Isaac Hayes, among other artists. They're all, rising funk artists. The issue with that as well, that is, those guys are also fighting for Sly's, audience. So Sly kind of loses that audience and also falls into further disarray, which is further drug use. Jerry, the saxophone player, because of Sly's heavy drug use, actually quit during the production of There's a Riot Going On. It just kind of shook the band up a lot and wasn't the same after that. Drake's uncle, Larry Graham, left in the making of their next album, Fresh, just considered Sly and the Family Stone's final classic album, where Sly basically had to replace a bunch of his other, replace his previous band, half of them, with new musicians. And it's not a bad album. It's very interesting. It's definitely even more than There's a Riot Going On. Very much Sly and not the Family Stone, since well, the Family Stone's kind of gone. The crazy thing about this album is there's like, so I can't say I've heard every single version of this album. I have heard there's at least 6 different mixes of this album because Sly just recorded so many different versions of this album specifically. Again, he's a perfectionist. He's recorded so many takes of the other albums. Here, he's recorded entire different versions of the album. Yeah, this album also influenced a bunch of people. The Red Hot Chili Peppers were told by George Clinton to listen to this album that influenced them to record a cover of one of the songs here. I can't remember which one. So yes, influenced the Chili Peppers, influenced one Herbie Hancock to record his iconic track "Headhunters." Probably heard in a commercial once or twice. The inventor of ambient music, Brian Eno, also loved the album a bunch. So yeah, pretty decent album. I wouldn't say it's as good as Riot or Stand, but it is a pretty good album. The standout track that everyone cites is "If You Want Me to Stay." Very good track. The
I want to just say the amount of stuff I'm going to be listening to over the next week is
yeah, right. Hey, don't worry, we're almost done. We're almost done. We have about 10 minutes worth of stuff, and we should be good. So Sly, despite falling out with white audiences, is still a capable musician. Kind of becomes even more desperate. He's losing fame, so he kind of gets very desperate. I mean, by being very desperate, he stages a concert. At the concert, he gets married, and it was basically yeah. Got married at Madison Square Garden during a concert, and the concert was a publicity stunt just so he could fill out the concert because he just wasn't able to fill out concerts anymore. Wasn't showing up to shows, he just being late to shows. There was one infamous concert at Radio City Music Hall where barely anybody showed up, and it was just such a depressing like atmosphere for the band that Sly and the Family Stone just dissolved like that. That's how terrible performance it was. They made one more album as the Family Stone. It was at that point it's like being stripped like to the bone at this point. It was called Small Talk. It's okay. It's not essential really at all. It's essential, I guess, if you're really curious about more sample work where it comes from. Specifically, there's the song called "Loose Booty," which was infamously sampled by the Beastie Boys in their song "Shadrach," which again is from their album "Paul's Boutique." Um, I guess I'll go on a little tangent about Shadrach. So, by the Beastie Boys. I remember I like did a presentation in like high school on like the story of Shadrach, right? And I mentioned the Beastie Boys, and it went pretty well actually. It was a really good. I actually got like very good reactions from that little presentation I had. So in college, I had to like write this journal entry, and I chose like that performance for my journal entry. And on that journal entry, you're supposed to write, "Oh, what's a song that relates to this experience?" I just wrote like, "Oh, Shadrach by the Beastie Boys." So since it was like a journal entry on like an online class, right? Someone you're supposed to like comment on someone else's like journal entry, and there was like some person who's like, "Oh, I see you like music, the Beastie Boys, huh? Might I recommend you Hillside Worship?" And I'm like, "Okay, sure." Anyways,
That's absurd. That's absurd. Oh,
it is it is absurd. It's so stupid. So Sly becomes very desperate. So he basically takes the route that a lot of post-fame musicians do and just becomes like a variety show act. In that he appears in award shows, he appears on talk shows, he appears on bandstand type shows as like a host, and he's basically like, "Hey guys, it's Sly. Sly, play your music, play the piano." And he just became that. He's very desperate for attention. He just faltering. He's considered damaged goods. He was almost going to get signed to Motown, but they just didn't want to sign him because, Sly's living in LA. What's going to happen in LA at the late 70s, early 80s? Crack is going to come into play, and
oh,
Sly gets addicted to crack, and it's really fucked up on crack. Not only get it really affects him even when he has a chance at a comeback. So I mentioned George Clinton earlier a bunch of times. George Clinton, he gladly welcomed Sly into Parliament Funkadelic, his touring band. And Sly still was like leaving shows earlier, just saying, "Hey guys, I gotta go." Leave the concert, just never come back. And he's also getting fucked up on crack on top of that. So fucked up that if you read Sly's arrest record for the 80s, it's like 2030, like being arrested 30 times for possession of crack. And that's just all he did in the 80s was just like get arrested over and over again. That was what he had kids because he got married a couple times, had a couple kids. And that's all his kids knew him for. Is like, "Oh, daddy got arrested again for crack. Daddy got arrested again for crack." And very publicly, being the that was all his media appearances, was just him talking about being addicted to crack, saying he's gonna get like sober on crack. He couldn't even get sober on crack for like more than a year, just like months. Get arrested again, again, again. He did record like some solo albums. His first solo albums, it's pretty decent. Again, it's just not essential, but the De La Soul sampled it for their debut album, so there's that. Another heavy album that you can't legally listen to the original version because the samples are too expensive. Anyways, that's kind of the end of Sly's actual career as a musician. The rest of that's like kind of becoming the opposite of what he was before. Where he's like this black icon, his voice, this extravagant, voice type person, to just becoming this enigma where he was alive, obviously, but people didn't know what he was going to do. And what I mean by that is, well, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame starts. Sly and the Family Stone, very influential group. They are inducted in the 90s into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The original group is there. Every single member is there on stage except for Sly. Sly is not on stage. Everyone's there's like, "Hey, where's Sly?" He obviously is not here because that's what he would always do. And Sly, unannounced, just shows up in the middle of their speech and just gives a little speech. And keep in mind, a lot of the band members had not seen Sly for like 10 plus years, all of them. This is like the first time they've seen him, and he just shows up.
he shows up
Yeah,
and gives a speech.
yeah, in the middle of his own induction ceremony. And that just kind of becomes the rest of Sly's career, is just these sporadic appearances. There was an infamous performance at the Grammys in 2006 where the full band reunited and gave this anniversary type performance. Went decently well. There's a couple reunion performances at festivals where again Sly would just leave after 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So he just, like I said, Woodstock is literally the best you're gonna get from Sly. I guess on another note, a really crazy thing about 60s, 70s musicians is obviously there's like the Woodstock performance, there's the Harlem Cultural Festival performance, but for a lot of bands a lot of bands are not lucky to have their concerts filmed. Sly technically is lucky because he has a couple of them filmed. The one saving grace, I guess, for the 60s and 70s for preserving a lot of these musicians is the variety shows, the bandstand shows. So quite literally any single band that is worth anything from that era has at least one performance from like either Germany, Japan, or America. And thankfully Sly, along with his other performances I mentioned, has performances on the infamous music Plastic. I think it's pronounced German show. He has one on Don Krishner's show. It's another music variety show. He had another one in the Midnight Special. So thankfully, Sly performing on these variety specials gives us lots of, I guess, material to work off for his live performances. Because otherwise, if he just didn't appear on those, we would just have only the Woodstock performance, which is really sad to think about. Because the Harlem one was lost for like 50 years.
On that topic, it's really depressing just how much stuff we've lost because of preservation and preservation issues.
Yeah, it's these like just these like thankfully these music shows they didn't delete their archives, and they just basically like to promote the new like hip records, and they kind of just become like this whole time capsule into a whole era where they're just some artists who, if you want to see a performance from them in their prime in color for at least like 30 minutes, you gotta rely on those shows. Another really crazy piece of trivia. So Larry Graham,
Hmm.
Drake's uncle. He became acquainted with Prince, and I mentioned earlier Prince was very influenced by Sly and the Family Stone. So obviously Prince has his song 1999, which talks about the end of the world coming at the year 2000, and during 1999 at his New Year's concert, Rave, I forget how the fuck he pronounced it, Rave to the Unknown or something. He invited Larry Graham to play on said concert where he performed. In the middle of his concert, a melody of a bunch of Sly and the Family Stone songs. That is not the crazy part about this. The craziest part about this is, well, infamously, Prince became a Jehovah's Witness, and that's what led to a lot of his weird antics towards the later part of his life. The person who introduced him to Jehovah's Witnesses was Larry Graham. So Sly is the reason why Prince became a Jehovah's Witness. I'm not even joking.
There's so many stories like this too, where there's just someone whose like footprints are completely over, not footprints, I guess, fingerprints. Yeah, his footprints. No, his fingerprints are just all over everything. Like there's pretty much every aspect of hip hop and soul and R&B. Like it seems like his fingerprints are like there, which is super cool.
Oh yeah. More on the Prince thing. Prince, in his own is a very influential artist and a very, even more. Prince is probably like a two-parter episode for another time. And I'll probably do Prince sometime later. But Prince was very influenced by him in that if you look at Sly's old outfits, he wears he's very sharply dressed. He has a lot of, very cool hats, very interesting glasses, sunglasses, very emblematic of that 60s, 70s, cool, very cool, New York kind of style. Because Sly did live in New York for a while. I forgot to mention that. If you look at Prince's outfits and his hairstyle too, is very influenced by Sly. And Prince's initial band, well, actually both of Prince's bands, to be honest. Actually, yeah, every single one of Prince's bands, the Revolution, the New Power Generation, and Third Girl Blind, very influenced by the Stones' way of being, where it's a very multicultural, multi-voice type. If you put pictures of Prince and the Revolution next to Sly and the Family Stone, it's very identical. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, huh, that's where he kind of got it from. And then, like as I mentioned before, his live performances are very similar. That I guess the big difference is Prince could perform for 3 hours, but he would still, pantomime for like an hour in that. Well, Sly, is like will sometimes just not show up for his shit.
It's always wild too. I guess I mean we talked about it, but just like the concept of just like having a show like that and then just not showing up to it. It's
Yeah, people would get really pissed at it. And he would influence a shitload of artists I've even mentioned still. Obviously, we got like the rap artists like P Funk, Outkast, Tribe Called Quest. But there's like other ones like Shaka Khan, D'Angelo. D'Angelo's a very obvious influence if you listen to his music, of the whole eclectic funk music. Probably the most apparent influence in nowadays is the Roots and that Questlove. Questlove, the drummer from the Roots, has made not one but two movies on Sly. So the reason I mentioned the Black Cultural Festival and that it's uncovered finally is that Questlove was able to uncover these lost tapes and make a documentary on the Harlem Cultural Festival. In that video, in that movie, which won Best Documentary, by the way, he included the Sly clips and he explained, Sly's importance there very briefly. I should also mention this about Woodstock. Woodstock was also edited by Mr. Martin Scorsese, so that makes two Oscar-winning documentaries that Sly was a part of. And as of this year, 2015, 2015, what the
it's 2015.
2025, yeah, or 10 years, yeah, but this like took us 10 years to make this because
This is the time
that's how much we
travel
stink.
podcast.
Not time travel podcast. So as this follow up. documentary to the, well, I should obviously name the documentary because it's the Summer of Soul, the revolution that was not televised, which is, named after the, Gil Scott-Heron song. He made his follow-up documentary that came out this year called Sky Lives: The Burden of Black Genius. And I should pose the question here, pose the idea here that Sly through and through was a black genius. And what I mean with a black genius is, well, he was a prodigy, and that worked against him and also worked with him. And that it worked with him that he was able to get, all these connections, but it worked against him in that he had to work 5 times as hard as a lot of his peers to actually break into white spaces. He had to basically become the bare minimum, which is a genius to break into white circles, mainstream culture, and also become a representative. A lot was expected out of him, and he crashed and burned, unfortunately, because of that. And it's unfortunately happened since then many times. And it's a big, I guess, duality kind of thing where he's obviously Sly is a very talented artist. He, as far as I'm aware, didn't really have any issues with anybody. Like he was apparently a very good, respectful guy. He just had a lot of, just drug issues, issues with himself. Normal person, they could deal with those problems on their own. But Sly, he had the spotlight on him, his entire fame, and it just got to him. He had to work so hard, and his Paul was equally as hard as the amount of work he put into it. And the Questlove documentary touches upon that, just this whole, I guess, contradictory, and also just how tough it is to be a black genius. And really, anytime it's a big expectation, and it's something I can't really ever speak on. It's something I can't really ever imagine, thinking on. And I guess I'll conclude this by Sly. He didn't make any albums for a long ass time. He did, the sporadic live performances. He wrote a
Mhm.
screenplay. He did thankfully reconnect with his kids, and he just kind of just lived a low life, or he just not like a low life, like a bad life, just like a low key life, where he just
Yeah.
be with his kids who are now adults at this point, and just just be like this old, black guy who's just watches like action movies on TV, and he just I guess you could say he retired. It was a very crash and burn retirement, but he got to thankfully live the last couple of years and get a documentary, and then he passed. That was the life of Mr. Sly
Literally
Stone.
this month, which is crazy. Like that's it's also there was really not a lot of like fanfare as far as like I mean obviously not maybe fanfare is not the best word but like there wasn't a lot of like celebration or like I didn't really see much about his passing. I had no idea.
Wow. Okay, that's crazy. I guess the final. I guess we could continue talking more about this. Um, I guess one thing I've always really felt, and especially with a guy like Sly or some of the other artists I mentioned, like George Clinton or
Mhm.
Stevie Wonder or any of these artists, is I I don't know if it's like the racial aspect of it or if it's not, but like a lot of these artists just aren't like talked about like that with a lot of people. Like I know in my like friend groups or like peer groups, never heard anybody talk about these guys ever, and
Yep.
I'm like wondering why that is. I, it's only until recently, like I know with like a lot of old school like R&B, like 80s, 90s R&B, it's only recently been like talked about in a lot of music circles. I mentioned Janet Jackson earlier, and she wasn't really talked about too much online until like very recently, to be honest. It's a very kind of recent reappraisal on her part. And Sly is, I guess, one of those where I'm like, dang, do people not really like listen to Sly that much? That's kind of crazy. I've kind of known this guy for
People
over a
really
decade.
don't like you really don't hear too much about his music these days, which is just from what we've talked about crazy to think about.
It's I mean, I guess the easy way to fix it is just to listen to Sly, and I guess if there's at
Mhm.
least one person who listens to this and listens to Sly, then I guess I did my job right here. Um, just introduce someone to something new, which is always great.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you start listening to Sly, then I did my job there. There you
I'm
go.
definitely going to.
Hmm. And I was originally thinking like, oh, I'm just gonna do Prince 'cause it's such an easy topic, but then like Sly passed like a couple days after I thought, then like, oh, I'll just do Sly. He deserves the spotlight. I didn't hear anybody post about him. Um, I'm not social media really that much. I guess big reveal. Oh, but like didn't really hear too many people talking about it. Obviously, I was like, oh shit, Sly passed, and gave me the excuse to watch the Questlove documentary, and it was a pretty good documentary. Obviously with this, I did a lot of research. I listened to the albums. I listened to the bonus deluxe editions of the album, which have a couple of scrap songs, the alternate versions, alternate mixes, a couple of the live performances that are floating around. So yeah, that's Sly. I hope. I guess I'll end it with a little a little off the cuff monologue. So Sly, influential artist, influenced P Funk, influenced G Funk, influenced the '80s and Janet Jackson and Prince, influenced '90s hip hop, influenced all the people that those artists influenced Miles Davis of all people, made practically made like the drum machine a thing. One of the first to have like a multicultural just band.
The
The
whole
first of
drum
many
machine
things.
thing is crazy. I had no idea that like
Yeah.
that was the first person to do it.
Yeah. Well, the first person doing the modern sense.
It's
Um,
also
yeah, you just
I want to comment on one thing I was thinking about earlier, and I apologize just before you continue. Just you hear a lot of people talk about how artists don't really have well, I guess people talk about internet people talk about how like art doesn't really have like much of a revolutionary aspect, but like you actually look historically and every single revolutionary is inspired by a piece of art, almost every single one of them. And you have people like Victor Hugo who wrote Les Mis, but were also on the front lines of the
mhm.
1848 revolution. So again, internet people just not knowing what they're talking about.
That I guess that makes me think of another thing. I guess I'll put that in my little monologue. And I guess with Sly, I like Sly. I've listened to his music for a long time,
Hmm.
but I guess we've had a bit of a not necessarily an issue, just fact of the matter, we've had a bit of a cultural restart. So a lot of artists like Slide because kind of get forgotten about. It's been almost 60 years since his like prime. It's it's a little scary that we're kind of having all these musicians kind of fall out of just public conscience in general. And if anybody just clicks upon this and just listens to Sly, then I'd consider that a great thing, to be honest.
Absolutely.
And I guess if anybody's like, "Oh, I forgot what the hell you were talking about, Eric. What should I listen to?" Okay, well, you should listen to the bare minimum. You should listen to Stand. You should listen to There's a Riot Going On. You should listen to Fresh, and probably the greatest hits compilation for the three exclusive tracks there. And anything else is optional. You should definitely watch the Questlove documentary. You should definitely watch Woodstock. You should definitely watch the Summer of Soul. And yeah, give Sly a try, please.